Temporarily occupied Crimea is of great importance for Ukraine in economic and military-political terms. It is difficult to return it by military means because Russia, together with the countries that support it, has a resource advantage over Kiev. This was stated to the UNN by the first Deputy Minister of Defense, Ivan Havryliuk. Crimea is a peninsula that has strategic importance in terms of gaining an advantage, especially in the Black Sea and Azov regions. Therefore, Crimea is of great importance, both economically and militarily-politically for Ukraine, for Russia as well, Havryliuk stated. Havryliuk commented on the possibility of returning Crimea by military means. It is difficult by military means due to the fact that Russia, together with the countries that support it, has a resource advantage over Ukraine. Therefore, the issue of returning Crimea lies both in the military and political spheres. More precisely, it is more in the diplomatic sphere, Havryliuk said. Ola Kurishko, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, also commented on the issue of Crimea's return to UNN. In fact, the liberation of all temporarily occupied territories, and this is not only about Crimea, but also about other TOTs, is a guarantee of security and stability. Because in fact, what Russia did with Crimea was to build a military base from which it began a full-scale invasion of the territory of Ukraine. This means that leaving these territories in the status or format they are in now is just a suspension, a certain freezing, but it is not the elimination of the causes and not a preventive measure against what will happen next, Kurishko told UNN. According to her, Russia is currently militarizing people and imprisoning people with pro-Ukrainian positions in the occupied territories. At the moment, it is quite obvious that what the Russian Federation is doing in the TOT is laying the groundwork for the future. The militarization of people living there, forced expulsion, imprisonment of those people who have a pro-Ukrainian position. New colonization of temporarily occupied territories by citizens of the Russian Federation. Everything just points to the fact that Russia will use these territories in the future for war and destabilization of the situation not only in Ukraine, but also in Europe, the report says. Dozens of Russian paratroopers from the 83rd Guards Brigade shot at each other to receive 3 million rubles in wound compensation for each incident. They aimed so as not to hit vital organs, and Russian federal television channels published stories about the officers' exploits. Channel 1 called them a unique group of snipers. The Kremlin-controlled newspaper Kommersant, citing the investigative committee, claims that 35 people were involved in the scam with self-inflicted gunshots. However, journalists from the Current Time television channel found out that there are many more such cases, and self-inflicted gunshots are not always committed for monetary gain. When soldiers shoot themselves, for example, in the arm or leg, it is called a self-inflicted gunshot. Current Time journalists managed to talk to one of these Russian soldiers. He was sent to war with Ukraine against his will. For his safety, we are not naming him or showing his face. I prepared tourniquets. I immediately applied two, above and below the wound. I don't know what will happen. And another guy, also a soldier, applied them. The third one was shooting. He shoots at both of us, and the fourth shoots at the third one. We agree to shoot at the shin, thigh, and arm, in the triceps area. Blood gushed out. Hot. Well, the whole boot is covered in blood. You can feel how much of it is coming out. A lot, he said. Inflicting injuries on each other made it possible to avoid taking part in the fighting. I didn't want to be there. We got there by deception, the soldier says. The main thing, according to this former serviceman, is to shoot in such a way that military doctors do not expose you. Otherwise, you will end up in a penal battalion or a tribunal. The shot is fired from a safe distance, but not close enough for the commission to be unable to determine later that it was a self-inflicted gunshot, because technically it is designed in such a way that in addition to the bullet, a stream of powder gases comes out of the barrel. And if the self-inflicted gunshot is made from too close a distance, then in addition to the wound, the bullet entry hole, you also get a tissue burn, says Alexei Alshansky, OSINT analyst to the Farewell to Arms project. Based on whether there is a tissue burn or not, in case of suspicion, experts determine whether the soldier shot himself. It is impossible to calculate how many such unexposed self-shooters in the Russian army were able to avoid participation in combat operations. I often think about all the events, but in the end, I come to the conclusion that in the situation I found myself in, I did everything right. I'm not even talking about the suicide itself, but the entire period of the conflict, the former soldier says. The case of this serviceman of the Russian army is the so-called classic self-inflicted wound, when after being wounded, there is removal from the front, hospital, and then escape from the Russian army, which is the main goal. But non-classic self-inflicted wounds arose immediately after the authorities began to call people into the Russian army on a commercial basis. Moreover, constantly increasing the rates for participation in combat operations as well as payments for injuries received. That is, the main goal of non-classic self-inflicted wounds is to get money.
Ukrainian troops have reported a successful operation to destroy 2 key bridges in Russia's Belgorod region. To do this, they used drones worth about $600 and enemy mines that were hidden under infrastructure objects, CNN writes. According to the 58th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade, the bridges were of strategic importance to the Russian army, ammunition and reinforcements were transported across them. The objects were mined by the Russian military so that they could be blown up in the event of a Ukrainian offensive. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones found caches of anti-tank mines. After that, the fighters carried out a precise strike using tactical FPV drones. The published footage shows powerful explosions that destroyed both bridges. We saw the mines and struck. Then we checked another bridge, it was also mined. We took advantage of this opportunity, said a representative of the brigade. The cost of the drones used was between 25 and 30,000 hryvnia. For comparison, blowing up bridges usually requires the use of expensive high-precision systems, such as HIMARS, where just one missile costs tens of thousands of dollars. Thus, the operation became an example of the effective use of cheap technologies against a much more expensive enemy arsenal. Ukraine has experience in destroying bridges to deter an adversary. At the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, a number of bridges near Kiev were blown up, delaying the Russian advance. Now this tactic has been successfully used on Russian territory, which has become rare positive news for Ukraine against the backdrop of the difficult situation on the front and the constant Russian airstrikes on civilian cities. Moscow has not yet officially commented on the destruction of the bridges.